20 seconds. That's all the warning they had. From the moment the spotter aircraft dropped its smoke marker until the first 16-inch shells obliterated everything within a 200-yard radius, 20 seconds. Not enough time to pray, barely enough time to run. For Japanese defenders across the Pacific, these 20 seconds represented the difference between life and complete annihilation. This is the story of how American naval fire coordination became the most precise instrument of destruction in World War II, and how those caught in its crosshairs learned to count their final moments in heartbeats. June 15, 1944, 05:42 hours, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Commander Robert Thornton stood in the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Pennsylvania, watching as the first Fire Support Coordination Team transmitted targeting data that would revolutionize naval bombardment. The system they were about to employ had been developed over 18 months of bitter lessons learned from Tarawa to Kwajalein, where uncoordinated naval gunfire had proven spectacular but largely ineffective against fortified positions. The innovation that morning wasn't the guns themselves. American battleships had been hurling massive shells since the war began. What had changed was the kill chain, the sequence of events from target identification to destruction. The Pacific Fleet had finally solved the fundamental problem that had plagued naval gunfire support since the age of sail: how to accurately hit targets you cannot see from your firing position. The solution involved three revolutionary components working in perfect synchronization. First, the spotter aircraft, typically Vought OS-2U Kingfisher floatplanes launched from battleship catapults, equipped with VHF radio systems that could maintain continuous contact with both the bombardment vessels and ground forces. Second, the Shore Fire Control Party, specially trained Naval and Marine Corps teams embedded with assault forces carrying SCR-609 radio sets capable of transmitting precise targeting coordinates. Third, the Fire Direction Center aboard the bombardment vessels, using the newly developed Mark 8 Rangekeeper, an analog computer that could calculate firing solutions accounting for ship movement, wind, barrel wear, and propellant temperature. According to Naval Gunfire Support documentation from Commander Amphibious Forces Pacific, the system operated with mechanical precision. The spotter aircraft would identify a target, a Japanese bunker, artillery position, or troop concentration. The pilot would drop a colored smoke marker, typically white phosphorus, directly on or immediately adjacent to the target. The smoke would billow up, visible for miles, marking the exact location for destruction. At that moment, the countdown began. The spotter would transmit coordinates using a standardized format: target type, grid reference, and range from the smoke marker. Aboard the bombardment vessel, the Fire Direction Center would receive these coordinates and input them into the Rangekeeper. The computer would calculate the firing solution in less than 10 seconds: elevation, azimuth, propellant charge, and time of flight. The gun crews, already at battle stations with their weapons loaded, would receive firing orders through voice tubes and telephone circuits. Within 15 seconds of the smoke marker appearing, the first salvo would be fired. The shells, whether 16-inch projectiles from battleships weighing 2,700 pounds each or 8-inch rounds from cruisers, would arc through the sky following ballistic trajectories calculated to within yards of accuracy. Time of flight varied by range and weapon, but for typical support missions at ranges of 10,000 to 15,000 yards, shells would be in the air for 20 to 30 seconds. This meant Japanese defenders had approximately 20 seconds from smoke marker deployment to impact, 20 seconds to recognize the threat, understand its meaning, and attempt escape or shelter. Lieutenant Commander Harold Vickers, who served as Fire Support Coordinator for the 5th Fleet, documented the system's development in after-action reports now preserved at the Naval History and Heritage Command. His account describes the evolution from crude area bombardment to precision fire missions. At Tarawa in November 1943, naval gunfire had expended thousands of shells with minimal effect on Japanese fortifications. The problem wasn't firepower, it was coordination and accuracy. The breakthrough came during planning for the Marshall Islands campaign in early 1944. Captain James Forrestal, working with Marine Corps planners, established the first formal doctrine for naval gunfire support coordination. The Doctrine designated SINPAC 1044, standardized communication procedures, established firing protocols, and, most critically, defined the role of spotter aircraft in the kill chain. Training exercises at Kaho'olaui Island off Hawaii in March 1944 refined the system. Naval gunfire support teams practiced with live ammunition, with observers recording accuracy and response times. The data revealed that coordinated fire using spotter aircraft could achieve first-round accuracy within 50 yards, revolutionary compared to previous bombardment methods that relied on map coordinates and estimation. By June 1944, the system had been perfected to the point where naval commanders could promise ground forces pinpoint fire support with response times measured in seconds rather than minutes. The Japanese, who had studied American amphibious doctrine extensively, had no counter to this capability. Their defensive planning assumed they would have time to reposition between bombardment salvos, that American fire would be inaccurate enough to allow movement and survival. They were catastrophically wrong. Japanese defensive doctrine, refined through 3 years of fighting, had prepared soldiers for many forms of death. They had trained to withstand sustained bombardment, to endure days of shelling while sheltered in reinforced positions. They understood artillery, how to read the sound of incoming rounds, how to time movements between salvos. But nothing in their experience or training had prepared them for the precision and speed of coordinated naval gunfire with spotter aircraft. Sergeant First Class Takeshi Yamamoto, commanding a reinforced infantry platoon defending the approaches to Garapan on Saipan, kept a diary that was recovered after the battle. His entries from June 15th through June 20th, 1944 provide a Japanese perspective on the psychological impact of precision naval bombardment. The diary, translated by Allied intelligence and now archived at the National Archives, describes the evolution from confidence to terror. June 15th entry. American ships bombard all morning. Shells fall everywhere but mostly hit empty ground. We remain safe in our positions. Their gunners cannot see us and waste ammunition on the jungle. June 16th entry. American planes drop smoke on Lieutenant Suzuki's position at 0700. Within seconds, massive explosions destroyed the entire bunker. No survivors. The Americans can see us somehow. We must be more careful about concealment. June 17th entry. 3 more positions destroyed today. Each time, plane drops smoke, then shells arrive immediately. Men are afraid. Someone to abandon positions when they see the smoke. I ordered them to hold. June 18th entry. Lost 2 squads this morning. Smoke appeared above their position. Men tried to run. Shells caught them in open ground. American accuracy is impossible. They hit exactly where the smoke appears. We have perhaps 20 heartbeats from smoke to death. This 20-second window became the defining tactical reality for Japanese defenders facing American amphibious assaults. Naval fire support coordinators aboard bombardment vessels had refined their procedures to minimize the warning time. The faster they could complete the kill chain from target identification to rounds impacting, the fewer Japanese soldiers could escape or take effective cover. Fire support doctrine documented in Pacific Fleet tactical bulletins emphasized speed above all else. Gun crews trained to reduce loading and firing times. Fire direction centers streamlined their calculation procedures. Communication protocols were simplified to essential information only. Every second saved in the kill chain was 1 less second for the enemy to react. Commander William Patterson, serving as fire support officer aboard USS Tennessee during the Marianas Campaign, documented the tactical evolution in his personal papers. He described how initial bombardment missions allowed 30 to 40 seconds from smoke marker to impact. Within days, as crews gained proficiency, this time dropped to 25 seconds. By the end of the campaign, elite gun crews were consistently achieving 20-second response times, the theoretical minimum given communication delays and mechanical limitations. The Japanese attempted various countermeasures. Intelligence reports from the Office of Naval Intelligence documented enemy tactics discovered through interrogation of prisoners and captured documents. Some units established lookouts specifically to watch for spotter aircraft and smoke markers. Others built multiple fallback positions, planning to evacuate immediately when smoke appeared nearby. A few commanders attempted to shoot down spotter aircraft, but American fighter cover made this suicidal. None of these countermeasures proved effective. The fundamental problem was physics and mathematics. 20 seconds was simply insufficient time for organized response. Japanese soldiers might identify the smoke, understand the threat, and begin moving, but 16-inch shells traveling at 1,600 feet per second would arrive before they could reach safety. July 21, 1944, 06:15 hours. Guam, Mariana Islands. The USS Colorado, USS Pennsylvania, and USS Idaho formed the primary fire support group for the assault on Asan Beach. Aboard Colorado, Fire Direction Officer Lieutenant Daniel Hartwell supervised what had become a precisely choreographed industrial process. The ship's main battery, 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, represented merely the visible component of a vast system spanning from ammunition magazines 4 decks below to spotter aircraft circling 3,000 feet above the target area. The logistics of sustained precision bombardment required extraordinary coordination, documented in Bureau of Ordnance reports. Each 16-inch shell weighed 2,700 pounds and required 6 separate powder bags, totaling 660 pounds of propellant. A single battleship firing continuously could expend its entire magazine of 1,200 shells within hours. Supporting this rate of fire required hundreds of sailors working in carefully orchestrated sequences below decks. In Colorado's forward magazines, damage control parties maintained precise environmental conditions. Temperature was critical. Propellant bags stored above 85 degrees Fahrenheit became unstable and could cause premature detonation. Humidity affected powder burning rates, changing muzzle velocities and thus impact points. Magazine crews used thermometers and hygrometers to monitor conditions constantly, adjusting ventilation to maintain optimal storage parameters. The shells themselves represented sophisticated engineering. High-capacity rounds designed for bombardment missions contained 153 pounds of explosive, enough to create a crater 30 feet across and 15 feet deep in solid ground. Armor-piercing shells, occasionally employed against particularly reinforced Japanese positions, could penetrate 30 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Each shell was individually inspected before loading, with armorers checking fuses, examining driving bands that engage the rifling, and verifying lot numbers to ensure consistent ballistic performance. Captain Theodore Chandler, commanding Battleship Division 5 during the Marianas Campaign, described the fire support system in his action reports as industrial-scale precision warfare. His assessment, preserved in Naval War College archives, emphasized how American manufacturing capacity enabled sustained operations impossible for Japanese forces. While Imperial Navy vessels carried similar large-caliber weapons, they lacked the ammunition reserves, the coordination systems, and the trained personnel to employ them with comparable effectiveness. The spotter aircraft component had evolved significantly by mid-1944. Early Kingfisher floatplanes had been supplemented and partially replaced by specially modified F-6F Hellcat fighters equipped with radio equipment for fire direction. These faster aircraft could remain on station longer, avoid Japanese anti-aircraft fire more effectively, and provide more detailed target assessment. Pilots underwent specialized training at Naval Air Station San Diego, learning not just to identify targets, but to calculate corrections for missed shots and assess battle damage. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Reynolds, who commanded Observation Squadron 4, embarked on multiple battleships throughout 1944, documented spotter procedures in training materials that became standard throughout the Pacific Fleet. His manual, Procedures for Naval Gunfire Spotting, specified exact communication protocols. Spotters used standardized terminology: target, splash, up, down, right, left, with numerical corrections in yards. This eliminated ambiguity and accelerated the correction process when initial rounds missed their aim point. The shore fire control parties represented the third critical component. These teams, typically consisting of 1 officer and 4 enlisted men, carried equipment weighing over 100 pounds, including radios, batteries, maps, and plotting equipment. They advanced with assault forces, often under direct fire, to maintain continuous communication with bombardment vessels. Their position on the front lines allowed them to identify targets infantry encountered and request immediate fire support. Training for shore fire control party members was intensive. At Camp Pendleton and Pearl Harbor, teams practiced coordinating live fire from offshore vessels onto designated target areas. They learned to read terrain from ground level and translate it into coordinates bombardment vessels could use. They studied Japanese defensive tactics to anticipate likely positions. Most critically, they learned to work under extreme stress, maintaining clear communication while under fire themselves. The integration of these components, magazines and gun crews, fire direction centers and ranging computers, spotter aircraft and shore fire control parties, created a system that could place shells weighing over a ton within yards of friendly forces. Records from the Guam operation show fire missions called within 200 yards of Marine positions, with shells impacting exactly where requested. This precision was unprecedented in military history and gave American forces an overwhelming advantage in any engagement where naval gunfire could be brought to bear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
August 3, 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Captain Hideaki Watanabe completed his assessment of American naval gunfire capabilities based on reports from Saipan and Guam. His classified memorandum, captured after the war and now held in the Library of Congress, concluded with stark honesty. American fire coordination provides no opportunity for effective countermeasures. From identification to destruction requires less time than organized withdrawal. Defensive positions, regardless of construction quality, cannot survive concentrated fire. Current defensive doctrine is obsolete. Watanabe's analysis represented a fundamental recognition that Japanese defensive strategy had been rendered ineffective by American technological and procedural innovation. The traditional Japanese approach relied on fortified positions that could withstand bombardment through superior construction, thicker concrete, deeper excavation, better camouflage. But precision fire direction eliminated the advantage of fortification. If Americans could see a position, they could destroy it, regardless of how well it was built. The Japanese attempted to adapt their tactics based on hard-won battlefield experience. Defensive preparations for Peleliu in September 1944 incorporated lessons from the Marianas disasters. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, commanding the 14th Infantry Division defending Peleliu, implemented new construction standards documented in engineering orders. His positions featured multiple concealed entrances, deeper excavation to survive larger shells, and deliberate separation of defensive works to prevent single fire missions from neutralizing multiple positions simultaneously. These adaptations proved insufficient. When American forces assaulted Peleliu on September 15, 1944, naval gunfire support operated with even greater efficiency than in previous campaigns. The USS Pennsylvania alone fired 1,481 rounds of 14-inch ammunition during the first 3 days. Fire support reports show average time from target identification to first rounds impacting had dropped to 18 seconds for priority targets, 2 seconds faster than Saipan operations. The Japanese discovered that construction improvements meant nothing against the volume of fire American forces could deliver. If one salvo failed to destroy a position completely, spotters would simply call for additional fire missions until nothing remained. Navy logs from the Peleliu operation document individual caves and bunkers receiving 10 or more separate fire missions, with hundreds of shells expended to ensure complete neutralization. Japanese soldiers learned to recognize the sequence that preceded their destruction. First, the sound of aircraft engines overhead, not the roar of bombers, but the lighter sound of observation planes. Then, the smoke marker, clearly visible billowing above or near positions. Finally, the distinctive whistle of incoming heavy shells, growing louder until the world exploded in overpressure, fragmentation, and dust. Those 20 seconds between smoke and impact became the most terrifying moments of the Pacific War for Japanese defenders. Intelligence reports based on prisoner interrogations revealed that many soldiers abandoned positions immediately upon seeing smoke markers, preferring to die in the open rather than be buried alive by collapsing fortifications. This represented a complete reversal of defensive doctrine that had emphasized staying in prepared positions under all circumstances. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, preparing the defense of Iwo Jima in late 1944, understood the implications better than most Japanese commanders. His defensive plans, discovered after the battle, specifically addressed the naval gunfire threat. Kuribayashi ordered construction of positions with multiple escape tunnels, assuming survival in place was impossible once a position was targeted. His orders stated explicitly, "Positions will be destroyed by American naval fire. Our defense depends on having sufficient positions that destruction of individual locations does not compromise overall defensive integrity." Even this adaptation, the most sophisticated Japanese response to American fire superiority, proved inadequate. At Iwo Jima in February 1945, American bombardment vessels fired over 22,000 shells in the 3 days before the assault. During the battle itself, fire support ships remained on station continuously, responding to hundreds of fire missions daily. The volume of supporting fire available to American forces simply overwhelmed any defensive measures Japanese forces could implement. The psychological dimension of precision naval bombardment extended beyond individual survival. Japanese military culture emphasized warrior spirit, the belief that determination and courage could overcome material disadvantages. But naval gunfire demonstrated the futility of this philosophy. No amount of courage protected soldiers from 16-inch shells. No martial spirit prevented fortifications from collapsing. The weapons stripped away illusions about spiritual superiority conquering industrial might. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese officers revealed deep psychological trauma specifically associated with naval bombardment. Veterans who endured kamikaze attacks, flame weapons, and close combat consistently identified precision naval fire as the most psychologically devastating weapon they faced. The combination of absolute lethality and complete helplessness, knowing death was coming in 20 seconds with no possible defense, created unique combat stress that persisted for decades after the war ended.
The human cost behind the Liberty ship program remained largely invisible to those counting hulls and tonnage. Each vessel required approximately 1,500 workers operating across multiple shifts. At peak production, with 2,710 Liberty ships ultimately completed, roughly 4 million Americans worked in the shipbuilding industry, a workforce larger than the entire United States Army in 1939. The demographics of this workforce revolutionized American industry. Women comprised roughly 27% of shipyard workers by 1943. Rosie the Riveter wasn't propaganda. She was Clara Mortensen, welding hull plates at Richmond Shipyard, or Helen Johnson, operating massive cranes at Bethlehem Fairfield, or thousands of other women performing work that had been considered exclusively male just 2 years earlier. African Americans found opportunities in shipyards that had been closed to them in peacetime industries. While discrimination certainly persisted, the desperate need for labor opened positions that represented significant economic advancement. integrated work crews became commonplace, challenging social barriers through the practical necessity of wartime production. The work was dangerous. Shipyard fatalities numbered in the thousands across the war years. Welders fell from scaffolding. Crane operators miscalculated loads. Workers were crushed by moving hull sections. The Portland Oregonian documented 53 deaths at local shipyards in 1943 alone. Multiply this across all facilities, and the human cost becomes staggering. Yet the work continued. Shipyard workers understood their labor was saving lives overseas. Every Liberty ship that reached Britain with tanks and ammunition was one more convoy that wouldn't be destroyed. Every vessel carrying food prevented starvation. The connection between welding hull plates in California and defeating fascism in Europe was direct and measurable. The vessels themselves proved far more capable than their hasty construction suggested. Liberty ships sailed to Murmansk through Arctic ice, to Calcutta through tropical storms, to Brisbane through submarine-infested waters. They served in every theater of war, carrying every type of cargo imaginable. Some Liberty ships were converted for specialized purposes: hospital ships, ammunition carriers, tank transporters, aircraft transports. The basic hull proved adaptable to numerous military requirements. This flexibility multiplied their strategic value beyond simple cargo capacity. The SS John W. Brown demonstrated exceptional versatility during Operation Overlord. She carried troops to Normandy on D-Day, then returned for vehicles and ammunition in subsequent crossings. Her crew made 11 round trips across the English Channel in June and July 1944, becoming floating shuttles in the massive logistics operation sustaining the invasion. By late 1944, Liberty ships had become so numerous that German U-boat commanders reported difficulty finding non-Liberty targets. The Atlantic was filled with them. Sinking one meant virtually nothing. 3 more were already en route to replace it. The psychological impact on U-boat crews became devastating. Veterans of the 1940-1941 happy time, when merchant ships were easy prey, now faced an ocean dominated by vessels that wouldn't sink easily, accompanied by escorts that had become lethally effective, supported by air cover that could locate submarines with increasing precision. Kapitän zur See Erich Topp, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders, stated in post-war interviews, "By 1944, we knew we were fighting American factories, not just American ships. You could sink a convoy and know that everything you destroyed had already been replaced before you could reload torpedoes. It was hopeless." The statistics confirmed this despair. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,664 Allied ships, totaling 7.8 million tons. But Allied shipyards, dominated by American Liberty ship production, launched 7.2 million tons. The gap was closing. In 1943, U-boats sank 597 ships, 3.2 million tons, while Allied yards produced 14.2 million tons. The war was over mathematically, though the killing continued for another 2 years. The final accounting revealed the magnitude of American industrial achievement. 2,710 Liberty ships were built between 1941 and 1945. They carried 75% of all cargo shipped overseas during the war. Not one convoy with Liberty ships was ever turned back due to losses. The replacement rate always exceeded attrition.
February 16, 1945. 0700 hours. Iwo Jima. The preparatory bombardment that preceded the assault represented the culmination of 3 years of naval gunfire doctrine evolution. 6 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, and numerous destroyers commenced what was intended to be a 3-day systematic destruction of Japanese defenses. Fire support plans allocated specific target zones to individual vessels, with spotter aircraft assigned to coordinate the methodical elimination of every identified fortification across the 8-square-mile island. Admiral William Blandy, commanding the Amphibious Support Force, believed the bombardment would render Japanese defenses ineffective before Marines landed. His confidence, documented in pre-assault briefings, was based on statistical analysis of previous campaigns. At Saipan, naval gunfire had neutralized 67% of defensive positions before troops went ashore. At Peleliu, the figure reached 71%. Computer projections suggested Iwo Jima's smaller size and concentrated defenses would allow even greater effectiveness, potentially 80% or higher. These calculations proved tragically optimistic. General Kuribayashi's defensive construction, featuring deeper excavation and more sophisticated tunnel systems than previous battles, proved more resilient than anticipated. But the bombardment still inflicted devastating damage, documented in post-war examination of Japanese positions. Of approximately 750 major defensive installations identified before the assault, naval gunfire destroyed or severely damaged 514, 68%, before Marines landed. This represented over 2,500 individual fire missions in 3 days. For Japanese defenders, the experience was apocalyptic. Private Jiro Takahashi, whose letters were found in a sealed container after the battle, described the bombardment's psychological impact. "The shells never stop. We cannot leave our positions. We cannot sleep. Every moment we wait for smoke to appear, knowing we have no time to escape when it comes. Men pray for quick death rather than waiting. Some have lost their minds from the constant fear." The mathematics of the assault phase demonstrated naval gunfire's decisive impact on battle outcomes. Marine Corps records show that during the first 3 days ashore, ground forces called 892 fire support missions. Of these, 847 were completed successfully, with an average response time of 17 seconds from request to impact. Japanese positions that might have required hours to reduce using ground assault were neutralized in minutes through naval fire support. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Linkletter, commanding 2nd Battalion 23rd Marines, documented how naval gunfire shaped infantry tactics. His after-action report states, "Our doctrine became identification and designation rather than direct assault. Upon encountering resistance, units would take cover, call naval fire on the position, then advance through the rubble. This reversed traditional infantry tactics where fire support supplements assault. Here, assault supplemented fire support. The transformation was complete. Infantry became reconnaissance forces, identifying targets for the primary weapon system, naval guns. Ground combat evolved into a systematic clearing operation where American technological superiority eliminated Japanese positions with industrial efficiency. Japanese soldiers brave enough to face death in combat found themselves instead waiting helplessly for destruction from weapons they could neither see nor fight. Japanese defensive doctrine had no counter to this tactical reality. Kuribayashi's elaborate tunnel systems provided protection between bombardments, but offered no solution to the fundamental problem. Any position that revealed itself by firing on American forces would be identified and destroyed within seconds. Japanese defenders faced an impossible choice: remain hidden and ineffective, or engage the enemy and die immediately thereafter. This dilemma led to the high Japanese casualty rates characteristic of the Pacific War's final battles. At Iwo Jima, approximately 18,000 of 21,000 defenders died. At Okinawa, casualties exceeded 90,000 from a garrison of 100,000. These figures reflected not Japanese willingness to fight to the death, though that cultural factor remained significant, but rather the mathematical inevitability of defeat
when facing an enemy that could identify and destroy defensive positions faster than they could be constructed. The psychological dimensions extended beyond battlefield tactics. Post-war studies by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed surviving Japanese military leaders about factors influencing surrender decisions. Multiple officers identified the hopelessness of defending against American fire support as a critical consideration. The knowledge that every defensive position, no matter how well constructed, would eventually be located and destroyed by naval gunfire contributed to the assessment that continued resistance was futile.
March 26, 1945. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended after 36 days of combat. American forces had fired 194,000 rounds of naval gunfire support, over 450,000 tons of shells in support of ground operations. Japanese defenders, who had prepared for months to create what they believed were impregnable defenses, discovered that 20 seconds warning before each bombardment provided insufficient time for any effective response. The weapon system that had evolved from crude area bombardment to precision destruction had fundamentally altered the mathematics of defensive warfare. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual battles. Planning documents for Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion of Japan, allocated unprecedented naval gunfire resources based on lessons from Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The combined chiefs of staff calculated that systematic reduction of Japanese home island defenses would require months of continuous bombardment involving every available battleship, cruiser, and destroyer. The planning assumed that precision naval fire would neutralize Japanese defensive positions before ground forces advanced, minimizing American casualties through overwhelming application of industrial firepower. These invasion plans never materialized. Japan's surrender in August 1945 came after atomic bombings and Soviet entry into the war. But post-war interrogations of Japanese military leaders revealed that the demonstrated effectiveness of American naval gunfire, the proven ability to systematically destroy any defensive position within seconds of identification, contributed significantly to surrender calculations. Japanese planners understood they faced an enemy that could identify and eliminate defensive works faster than they could be constructed, making prolonged resistance militarily futile. Lieutenant General Torashiro Kawabai, Deputy Chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, testified during Strategic Bombing Survey interviews that naval bombardment capabilities influenced strategic assessments. His statement, recorded in September 1945, acknowledged American naval fire coordination demonstrated industrial and technological superiority we could not match. Their ability to destroy defensive positions within seconds of identification meant traditional defense-in-depth strategies were obsolete. We calculated that defending the home islands against forces with such capabilities would result in complete destruction of our remaining military forces within weeks. The human cost of these 20-second warnings accumulated across dozens of battles and thousands of individual fire missions. Japanese military records, incomplete due to widespread destruction, estimate that tens of thousands of soldiers died specifically from naval bombardment during Pacific War amphibious operations. The actual figure is likely significantly higher, as many casualties were never recorded when entire units were eliminated in their defensive positions. For survivors on both sides, the experience left permanent psychological marks. American naval gunfire support personnel, despite operating from relative safety aboard ships, reported stress related to the one-sided nature of the destruction they inflicted. Veterans Administration records from post-war decades document that fire direction officers and spotter pilots experienced guilt about the industrial-scale killing their precision had enabled, even while recognizing the military necessity. Japanese survivors carried different but equally profound trauma. Interviews conducted by Japanese historians in subsequent decades revealed that veterans who experienced naval bombardment described a specific form of helplessness, knowing death was approaching with mathematical certainty, yet being completely unable to fight back or defend themselves.
This psychological impact differed from other combat experiences, where soldiers felt they could influence outcomes through skill or courage. The technological and procedural innovations that created 20-second kill chains represented a watershed moment in military history. For the first time, battlefield weapons could locate and destroy targets faster than human reaction time allowed effective response. This transformation from warfare where human factors like courage, skill, and determination were decisive, to warfare where technological superiority and industrial capacity predetermined outcomes, defined modern combat in ways that remain relevant 8 decades later. The fire support coordination systems developed in the Pacific became foundation for modern precision strike capabilities. Contemporary military doctrine for close air support, artillery coordination, and naval surface fire support traces direct lineage to procedures established during World War II Pacific campaigns. The principle remains identical: rapid identification of targets, immediate calculation of firing solutions, and delivery of overwhelming firepower before enemies can react or escape. The 8 square miles of Iwo Jima, now returned to Japanese control and renamed Iwo To, contain permanent reminders of precision naval bombardment's impact. Hundreds of shell craters remain visible across the island. Japanese defensive positions, even those constructed with massive concrete walls and deep excavation, showed the systematic destruction inflicted by coordinated naval fire. These physical scars serve as monuments to a form of warfare where 20 seconds represented the difference between life and annihilation. Today, military historians recognize naval gunfire support coordination as one of the Pacific War's decisive technological advantages. The system that evolved from crude bombardment to precision destruction demonstrated how industrial capacity, properly organized and employed, could overcome any defensive strategy regardless of defender courage or determination. The Japanese soldiers who counted their final heartbeats after seeing smoke markers weren't defeated by lack of bravery. They were defeated by mathematics, physics, and industrial organization operating at scales their military system couldn't match. The legacy of those 20-second warnings extends beyond military history into broader understanding of technological warfare. The experience demonstrated that in conflicts between industrial powers, victory ultimately belongs to those who can organize resources most effectively and apply technology most precisely. Japanese defenders who built elaborate fortifications discovered that craftsmanship and labor couldn't protect them against an enemy that could systematically identify and destroy defensive positions faster than human reflexes allowed response. Their courage was genuine, their preparations thorough, but their defeat was predetermined by fundamental disparities in industrial capacity and technological sophistication they had no means to overcome.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.